Morning. Anthony DePalma, Seton Hall University, mid-size, old-line Catholic private university in New Jersey, about 10,000 students. My alma mater. 5 years ago, the president of the university, Monsignor Sheeran, invited me to come back to take a special position that he had created, and I thought it was a good time to do that after 22 years at the New York Times. I had a book project, I had other book projects that I wanted to do, and so there I was. That very first day and that very first class, thinking about this change in my life, I came into the class, there were the students sitting in front of me, and I thought in the spirit of transparency, I would let them know that I was really out of my comfort zone. Then started to talk about the class, which was U.S., Latin America, and the media. And they all looked at me kind of strange, and not having been in the classroom for 30 years, I wasn't sure what was going on. They continued to look strange, and I finally realized I was in the wrong classroom. I think I'm in the right room, but that feeling of being out of my comfort zone continues. In no way am I a leader in this movement. It's me at Seton Hall and what I took from being here at the invitation of Seton Hall and Stony Brook a number of years ago for the initial session, and what else I can do. There's no we, it's just me. And I don't have any outreach programs, and I didn't even know that that was part of what you all were doing. I am still working as a journalist. My position is part-time, so I am the journalist in the classroom. It is offered in the journalism program. A lot of the students are not journalists. Communications is the largest major there. Public relations is the largest group of them. Journalism is shrinking. Public relations is growing. So I try to do this in a way that I can bring in my experiences to them and help them sort of understand and become the better citizens. And thank you, Dean, for that terrific segue, because thinking like a journalist is basically the presentation that I had here today. Do I just click?
Yeah, click to the right.
Anyway, that same feeling of, or spirit of transparency is what I try to bring into the classroom. Even though I'm more comfortable in a newsroom than a classroom, in the classroom I try to focus on the mechanics in a way. The kids, although they don't read, they don't pick up a copy of the New York Times, they know about the New York Times. I don't want them to be awed by it, so we really focus more on page 2 of the newspaper, the corrections, and especially the editor's notes, than we do on page 1. And all the big stories that for most of these undergraduates is just so far beyond their reach that they get overwhelmed by it. So we try to focus on a combination of how the sausage is made and a sense of awareness that helps them navigate this tsunami of information that's coming at them. So I usually start the semester with the elements of journalism that was suggested here. Fantastic. I actually use it in all of the courses I teach, whether they are journalism courses or not. And then we use the 48-hour news blackout that you suggested. Invariably, they are not much concerned about it because they don't read newspapers anyway. And then when they realize that it's an absolute 48-hour blackout on all information, they come back a couple of days later and are really worried that they've missed out on something, particularly their phones. It's when you get to the phone and they're not allowed to use the phone, okay, that it really gets them. And then I use something that I originally found on News Trust, which also was recommended here as a good site. I use that later in the semester when the kids are a little bit able to abandon their worst habits, and we look at pieces and evaluate them. But what they suggested was thinking like a journalist and the 4 Ds. Which I set up for the kids in this way so that they're not, again, not intimidated by it. The 4 Ds are doubt, detect, discern, and demand. And we go through it pretty quickly. This was the 4 Ds were their ideas, and then the rest of it is what I interpreted to tell them not to automatically believe everything they read or see, and to use some examples, usually from the New York Times or something that's close by. This one, anybody remembers it, was actually printed, this photograph was printed in the New York Times. It shows a cacao pod where they get chocolate beans from, and an iguana. Peru had just released a brand new type of high-class chocolate. And a day or two later, some readers wrote in or called in and pointed out that actually a cacao pod doesn't look like that, but looks more like this. And there was an editor's note in the newspaper where they indicated that they had been duped by the public relations firm that had sent this information out. So it was a good way of pointing out to them that the idea of accuracy and verification goes down to a level as small and seemingly insignificant as this, but the lesson is if you don't get this right, how can we trust anything that you do? So the idea of doubt, usually then a series of questions that they might ask themselves, what a journalist might ask about what kind of information you're getting, what you're bringing to it, and how you handle what you're getting. Second one is detect and relentlessly pursue the truth to discover the big picture. Sometimes things are not what they seem to be. And I use this as an example of that. This was a couple of years ago. There was a tornado in New York City. This photograph ended up being tweeted. It got picked up very quickly by a number of organizations, including Time, which put it up. And it's a pretty dramatic photograph, right? Except that it turned out that the photograph was real, but it happened in 1976, and it actually came off of the National Weather Service website. It's not over New York, but that's actually close to home, Jersey City, New Jersey. And some guy put it up on his own Twitter account as a joke, sort of nudging his own friends, and it went kind of viral, and all of a sudden it got to the news organizations, and they're saying, there was a storm that day, but it wasn't this storm. We need to get it because it's already out there, without ever checking. Similarly, this was published around the time of Sandy. It actually happened in August of last year. So the questions you ask are how do you use this information that's out there, all of it, to sort of verify, start asking questions about detecting the difference between news and assertions in the blog and so on. Discern is kind of difficult for some of the kids to understand, but when we get down to it, looking for a fair balance, they all know something about fair and balanced with Fox News. We don't go into it much, but a photograph like this, which they initially just think it's a photograph, when we start to talk about it and realize what it's suggesting beyond the elements that are in there. Sarah Palin with a child and a bloody moose or caribou, suggesting a lot more than what might have actually been taking place there. Similarly, New York Post, a great source of material for discerning what exactly they are. Yes, the president did get bumped during a basketball game, but putting it that way suggests so much more, and what it is that the Post is trying to get across. You get them to see things in a different way, and discerning how do you feel about what you're looking at, what is it that they're trying to get you to believe. And then finally, demand. This sort of crosses over between being a news consumer and being a news producer. But I like to give them the sense that the First Amendment really does apply. And it is actually something that still exists in the United States and not so much in other places. Freedom of speech doesn't always come with the protections we have. And we usually spend a class or two talking about Westboro and using either the photographs or some clips and it gets them really involved in looking at issues in ways that they hadn't ever looked at before. I tell them usually that at the New York Times, we were given a card that we were supposed to keep in our wallets, and whenever we were in a courtroom and somebody was not providing the information, we were to stand up and say that. And it informs them a little bit. News versus opinion, which they really don't usually, even these undergraduates don't have much information, they don't have much experience with. And that last slide was Citizen Kane, because we do end up eventually bringing it all back to the idea of informing democracy and them being citizens either as producers or consumers. What doesn't work so well, I tried in the first class that I taught on news literacy to get them to bring in the actual paper, which is no longer available at the bookstore. I had to make a special purchase. They brought it in so I could see that they had it, but they didn't read it. The next one was to get them a special discount online, which they all got. It's very, very cheap. They still weren't reading it, so I ended up having to tweet at the beginning of the day what it was that we were going to be talking about later on, and hopefully some of them picked it up. Thank you.